Mitre saws are incredibly useful machines. They've come down tremendously in price over the last few years. 20 years ago they used to cost an absolute fortune. You could get cheaper ones, but they weren't very good. Now you can get some that aren't expensive, that are absolutely fantastic and do a brilliant job of cutting wood or metal. They do come in a few different shapes and sizes. The two that you can see behind me here, that one is a 10-inch, that will cut wood, metal and plastic all with the same blade. You can even put a diamond blade on that and cut masonry. The one at the back there is a 12-inch, that will cut timber or aluminium with a special blade. So I'll look at some of the features of the machines a bit later on. I'm not going to go into great detail on the machines because I have covered that in other videos, but we're going to look at some of the safety aspects of using a mitre saw. There are some people on YouTube that use mitre saws, and quite frankly they don't have a clue what they're doing. They're showing you dangerous ways of using them. So hopefully this video will help you to make sure that you use it the correct way. To start off with, we're going to look at some personal protective equipment, or PPE. The very minimum PPE that you should be wearing when you're using a mitre saw is a pair of safety glasses and also some form of earring protection. These machines are very noisy in use, and if you keep using them over a long period of time you will end up with earring damage, which nobody wants. There are a couple of ways you can protect your ears. You can get a pair of earmuffs like that, which will offer absolutely brilliant protection, or you can use earplugs. I have to admit that I normally have a pair of earplugs in my pocket everywhere I go, but if I'm actually cutting metal I do tend to use the ear defenders because they give you better protection. So for wood it's very simple: pair of safety glasses, ear defenders, that is the very minimum you should be looking at. If you're cutting wood you should be able to hook the machine up to a vacuum cleaner or a dust extraction unit. That'll take away the majority of the dust. If not, or if you're cutting MDF, you definitely need a dust mask, a very good quality dust mask if you're cutting MDF, because the dust particles off that are particularly nasty. If I'm using one of these machines to cut metal or I'm cutting masonry on it, then the PPE goes a step further. I tend to put the safety glasses on. I'll probably also wear a dust mask. I'll put the ear defenders on and also a full face visor. If you're wondering why I wear the full face visor, it's because if I go on site and I have to use an angle grinder, we have to wear one of these anyway. So it's good practice to wear one of these if you are cutting metal or masonry using a mitre saw. It really does give you full face protection. Also, if I was to cut something that is dusty using the saw, I would also put a dust mask on. So that's the PPE covered. We're now going to take a closer look at some of these machines. If you're using your mitre saw a lot, it is a lot better if you have an actual stand for it. The one I'm pointing at now is the Evolution stand. That is a very cheap stand, but the quality on it is absolutely fantastic for the money. It's very useful and you can fit virtually any mitre saw on that stand. Over at the back there we have the DeWalt leg stand. That is a lot bigger and it's also quite a bit more expensive, but again it is a very, very good quality piece of equipment. It's always easier using a saw when it's on a stand because you have something there to support long pieces of material, etc. Before checking the blade for being square, or before making any adjustments to the blade whatsoever, it's absolutely critical that you ensure the machine is unplugged. One of the first things you want to do before you use your saw, even if you've had it stored for a long time, they can get banged about and it can adjust them slightly, is to check that the blade is square to the table. So to do that you're going to need a square, and all we do is simply slide that on there and touch it onto the blade, and that should be completely square. There should be no gap in between there. If you get a gap you need to adjust your blade. You also need to check it this way, from the fence at the back to the blade again, to ensure that that is square. If it's not square in either of those two planes, you're not going to get a straight cut and your mitres will be an absolute mile out. On a lot of mitre saws you will get a port where you can hook it up to an extraction unit. It's always a good idea doing that. That will take away the majority of the sawdust when you are cutting. We're going to start off by doing a simple cross cut on this piece of 8x2 timber. So I'm going to put it on the machine. I'm going to ensure it's up against the fence at the back there, get it exactly where I want it, and then I'm going to clamp that down in position. That is now firmly fixed to the machine. There's no danger of that moving anywhere. So this particular machine is a sliding mitre saw. These are incredibly useful, but you have to use them correctly. So it's important when you are doing a cut on this machine that you always pull it out as far as it will go before starting the cut. And then you need to get the machine going up to full speed before you plunge downwards and then push the machine back. What you don't want to do is get the machine started and slam it down into the workpiece. That will damage the blade and then you'll end up buying a new blade. Also, you don't want to set the machine touching the piece of timber before it has reached full speed, because that can also be dangerous. That can also damage the blade. So every time you pull it out as far as you can do, get the machine going to full speed before gently touching the piece of material. Once you've gone through the material, you then push it back into the machine. I have seen some people that have started cutting there, they've gone through the piece of timber and then pulled it back that way, which is very dangerous. That can give you a kickback. It's a bit like using a circular saw backwards when you do that. You should never start your cut there and end it back there. You always start out there and end your cut back there. So that is the most basic thing, and that is very important when you're using a saw like this. I've now put some earplugs in. I'm now going to put some safety glasses on. I'm going to switch the vacuum on and then I'm going to make this cut. You will notice when I made that cut that I left the blade in the material until the blade stopped turning. That is the safest way of using a mitre saw, although a lot of people quite simply let the blade go up like that because it is still covered by the blade guard when the blade is in the up position. But if you want to be 100% safe, you are better off leaving it down in the workpiece until the blade stops. So that is a cross cut. You can see that that's given us a very clean cut. I'm now going to do a mitre cut, so we need to undo the knob at the front there, and then we just need to turn that to whichever angle we want. And we're going to cut this at about 30 degrees. So again, I'm going to put that in position. I'm going to use a clamp again to hold that down. You do have to be careful when you're doing mitre cuts and bevel cuts because of the position that the blade travels in. It's not going straight back and forwards anymore. So you do have to be extremely careful where you put your hands when you're doing this. You are much better off using the supplied clamps if you can do. So that is a mitre cut. Sometimes you need to mitre a piece of wood which is a bit too big for the machine. You can't actually stand this up on there to cut it because it's too deep to be cut. You've no chance of cutting that on there. So that is where the bevel cut comes in. So you can simply lie the wood down flat like so. It's then a good idea to clamp it. You can't always get the clamp in the position where you want it, so it can be very difficult clamping the workpiece. But for this demonstration, I'm just going to clamp this side of the wood. So I'm going to drop that down there. Just tighten that up. I'm now going to ensure that the fence at the back there is out of the way, because this machine will very easily cut through that. And then just going to undo this lever at the back. I'm just going to tilt the machine over till it gets to 45 degrees. That's now locked in at 45 degrees. I can now tighten up the handle at the back there. So that is a bevel cut. You can can also do a combination of a bevel cut and the mitre cut at the same time, which is known as a compound mitre. So I'm now going to undo that. We'll just move that around there. And that is a compound mitre. So that has demonstrated the 4 basic types of cuts that you can make on a sliding mitre saw. Any sliding mitre saw will have a maximum amount of timber that it can cross cut, but you can often double that if you do a plunge cut and then turn the material over. So it is possible, if you have a saw that can cut, for example, 300mm, it is possible to cut a piece of material that is 600mm wide. Aluminium can be very difficult to cut unless you have a machine like this, and this machine absolutely eats aluminium just with the regular blade on that comes with the machine. But the problem is with aluminium is that it actually sticks to the blade and it can actually start to clog up on the teeth. So if you do get that problem, it's very easy to fix. If you're cutting aluminium and the blade starts to clog, simply cut a piece of steel using the blade and that will clean off any of the aluminium that is stuck to the teeth on the blade. I have to point out that not all machines can cut aluminium and steel. It's only the Evolution machines that can cut aluminium, steel and wood with the same blade. You can also cut a groove or a trench in a lot of material by using the grooving stop, sometimes called a trenching stop. That actually limits the depth at which the blade can go to on the machine. That enables you to cut grooves or trenches in the material. So if you wanted to cut a groove in a piece of timber, you can do it very easily using a sliding saw like this. But one thing you have to do is you actually have to pack the material forwards, like so. So you have to pack the material away from the fence at the back there because the blade cuts on a radius. If you try to trench that piece of timber, you're simply going to cut the shape of the blade in that piece of timber because you're cutting on a radius. So you would have to put a block behind it, and then as you cut that piece of timber, you cut a perfectly straight cut all the way through it because you're using the bottom of the blade. So trenching or grooving is an extremely useful feature that you can do on most sliding mitre saws. If you're lucky enough to have the Evolution machine, you can also trench metal as well as cutting a trench in timber. So I think you'll agree that is a very useful feature. I do hope this video has been helpful, and if it has and you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel.